Rightio.
I'll keep them pretty short, sharp. I'll give you an idea and you guys could just elaborate because we're not going to feature the questions on there. So just give as much detail or as information as you can think of as we go and we'll see which direction we take.
Fitzroy forever.
Football history is being created tonight with the clubs deciding on the future of Fitzroy.
There was times when we got locked out of training. We trained at South Melbourne. The padlocks were on there one night, so we couldn't get in.
Will the Lions die? Will it be the North Fitzroy Kangaroos? Or have the Brisbane Bears trumped everyone with their 11th hour merger offer?
Towards the end, we had sell-out crowds at the Gabba.
Going to the game each week was a bit like going to a state funeral.
There's the siren. The end has come in Melbourne for Fitzroy.
People don't like change, and particularly football supporters. The clubs were all happy for mergers to occur as long as it wasn't them.
All of a sudden, I felt like I didn't have a team to support.
I just kept on crying and crying.
You know, I'm from Melbourne. Why would I barrack for a club called Brisbane?
I saw it more along the lines of a takeover than a merger.
We're part of the Brisbane Lions and we'll still be a part of it till the day we die. We lived in Fitzroy till I was about 8 years of age in Westgar Street, and when you cross Smith Street, that separated Fitzroy and Collingwood. So we moved in the same street, but it was a different name once you crossed over Smith Street. We were in between Collingwood's ground and Fitzroy's ground. I used to sell footy records at Collingwood's football ground and football records at Fitzroy footy ground. Fitzroy, Collingwood, Richmond and Carlton, you know, they were hard to get around. It was just, you barracked for that team and that was it. No one else mattered. My father, Dan, who's passed away, he played in the 44 Premiership, and my two brothers, Ron and Dan, both passed away, unfortunately. They played in the thirds and seconds too, so we had a great association with the Fitzroy Footy Club. My father had played with Len Smith, and Len Smith was coach of the thirds, and he took me over to see Len, and Len let me train with them. Had no hope of getting a game at 13 years of age, but I trained with the thirds for a couple of years before I got a game. His teachings, the way he went about the training, showed you how to train and what to do, and he showed a big interest in yourself. So that's how it all started. We used to catch a furniture bus outside the Milk Bar in Nicholson Street, Fitzroy, to go and play of a Sunday, and we go in this furniture van all the way down to St Kilda and play down there, all over the place, up to Studley Park in Collingwood, and we'd be in this furniture van. And I was playing on the wing as a kid of 14 with them, you know. So those little teachings taught me well. But I was inspired by people that had years of experience under their belt. I loved a bloke called Colin Davey, number 11. He was our centre half-back, and I'd been promoted to play half-back flank alongside Colin, but he was tough and hard. But he used to say to me, once I got a few games under my belt, he used to say to me, Kevin, you go for the ball and I'll knock him down. There was the great Kenny Ross, number 22, a great physical bloke, fitness-wise and hard as nails, but he was a great teacher of how to train and how to be hard on yourself, because I used to get early to training of a Tuesday and Thursday, and he had me running laps before we even trained with Smithy. So, but you know, those people, the 9-gallon puppy dog's tail, that's Alan Gale, our captain. He was a great leader and an inspirational man. But Donny Furness, Tony Ongarello, Jack McGregor, those people, Norm Johnson, those people live in my memory forever.
3 Lions out there, out the Murray. Here's Warden. Here's Kevin Murray's got the chance to pick a goal. It's got to be close, it's there.
Oh yeah, it was no money. I mean, you didn't play for money. You played because you wanted to play for your club, you know, and it meant a lot to represent your club. Because these fellas that I've mentioned earlier, they led you and taught you like they were taught by the younger generation when they were coming up through the sticks. I always remember when I got a game, it was £5 a game, and Norm Johnson said, "You made you kids, you know, I've been playing here for years for £3 a game." And when my dad played in the 30s, they used to fight like bugger every Thursday night to get in the team because that 30 bob helped pay for the rent and feed us, you know, so life has changed so much.
Kevin Murray was probably the second best player that ever played at Fitzroy.
The greatest, of course, was Hayden Bunton, who won 3 Brownlow medals in the 1930s. A lot of younger people saw the end of Kevin Murray, where he was a strong, powerful, tough and rough halfback flanker. But in the early centre halfback, in his early days, Kevin was a totally different player. He was a skinny, an outstanding player. He played for Victoria when he was about 18 or something. He played more than 300 games at Fitzroy. He was a fantastic player, and he actually used to wear a back brace. He had a back injury towards the end of his career. He had this huge corset, and he ended up playing suburban football. I think he was playing with Ascot Vale when he was about 48 or something. He was still playing. Like, he finished playing with Fitzroy at maybe 36. A tremendous player. As you know, he wears a Brownlow medal around his neck. He was covered in tattoos. A really strong individual. Everybody loved him. I can't think of anybody, I know it's a cliche, but I can't think of anyone who'd have a bad word about Kevin Murray.
Murray had returned to Fitzroy in 1967 and won the 1969 Brownlow with 19 votes.
Fantastic thrill. I always recall the night, and I don't think any Brownlow medalist would forget his night. And it was a wonderful thrill and something that I'll never ever forget.
Well, I wear it here, and I don't wear it to skite about it, but I was the last over the radio, and so you ran a lap of honour at the MCG first semi-final day. Sir Rowan Delacombe was the governor, and he draped the Brownlow around my neck. Now, I don't wear it to skite about it, but I wear it to share it with people, because it was the people that helped me win this Brownlow. And I used to get stopped in the street so often by a father with his son or his daughter to get a photo taken with them. So I put the Brownlow around the kid's neck so they've got something to remember me by when I'm pushing up daisies, because, you know, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people have had their photo taken on, not for me to skite about it, but to share it with them.
My name is Jonathan Brown, proud Fitzroy supporter and proud Brisbane Lions premiership player. The reason I was associated with Fitzroy and barracked for him as a kid growing up was my father, Brian, played 51 games back in the late 70s, early 80s for the mighty Roy boys, and obviously as a kid growing up, looking through the scrapbooks, and I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps and supported the Lions. It was a tough team to support because didn't have many wins.
There is a sign to stop the agony of Fitzroy.
I certainly didn't get in trouble from the teachers for wearing my jumper to school, because they knew it had only happened once, maybe twice a year towards the end, which is funny but sad in the same right. But I was still very proud of the heritage, and like all Lions supporters, hoping one day they'd come good. Didn't see Fitzroy play a hell of a lot live. My father, Brian, was coaching back in the country at that stage, so certainly a lot of days listening to the transistor radio or the rare occasion they'd show it on TV. So when I did get to go to the games, I had the privilege of Dad obviously could get me into the room, so I thought it was unbelievable to get the autographs of Alistair Lynch and Paul Roos, Richard Osborne, just to name a few. It was an amazing experience. So it didn't matter if they got beaten that day or whatever the margin was, just to meet my idols and my heroes was amazing.
So I was drafted in, I think it was October or November of '86. There was financial pressures on the Fitzroy Footy Club for a number of years. There was times when we got locked out of training. We trained at South Melbourne. The padlocks were on there one night, so we couldn't get in, which for us young blokes, we didn't think that was too bad because we got a night off training. And sometimes the lights weren't overly bright, and we had the training one corner at the Albert Oval. But again, that was all part of it. We sort of still enjoyed ourselves. And I think that sort of adversity at different times brought us closer together.
Richard Osborne, cleverly, back to Rendell. Rendell hooks it back in front of goal. Here's danger for North Melbourne. Lynch! A brilliant mark over the top of the pack.
What a great mark. Well, what a great jump from there, and got a good ride on the pack. And to mark that on your chest at that height, excellent leap.
Going for Fitzroy's 5th goal of the game. He kicks, and I think he's put it through. He has.
My name's Ross Oakley. I was the chairman and chief executive of the Victorian Football League initially, and then the AFL from 1986 to 1996. When I arrived, morale wasn't strong. The league was in debt. things hadn't been going well with football. Memberships were down, attendances were down, and had been falling for many years, and player payments were rising alarmingly, and the league really was not economically viable in the form that it was in. Well, there were at least half the clubs technically bankrupt, and yes, that was a major concern, and that's why we had to take some action to try and build a revenue base, and that was why the national competition was important. You look back now, we were getting $3 million a year for television rights. What are we getting now? Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And that happened because we developed the competition into a national competition. And without that, a Victorian competition, I think, would now be dead. We were trying to get approval for 2 new teams in the competition, the Brisbane Bears and the West Coast Eagles, and that was a difficult task. Brisbane Bears were admitted quite easily, but the West Coast Eagles looked like they were going to get knocked back. But when one of the club directors was convinced that the $666,000 that they were going to get a share of the licence fees that we were going to charge was going to come into his pocket, he very quickly changed his vote.
On October 7, the VFL directors voted unanimously in favour of granting the Brisbane licence to the Cronin QAFL syndicate.
Cheers now. Paul, it's official. Congratulations.
The dream had been realised.
And so the Brisbane Bears came into the comp. We had 2 new teams.
What do we say when we run out to play? Dare to beat the bear. What do we say when we run our way? Dare to beat the bear. We're hot, we're mean, we're strong, we're a team. We're the very best team you've ever seen. We're the Brisbane Bears.
Today is a very significant day for Australian rules in Queensland. It is also an historical day for the new mighty Brisbane Bears.
Look, we didn't give them sufficient support. That is a fact. And the problem was that we had to get all the clubs to approve the entry of these new teams to the competition. If we weren't tough on them early, we would not have got the decision the way it was. Our feeling was, let's do what's necessary to get them into the competition, and then we can ease the requirements as the years roll by, and that's exactly what happened.
In the early days, the rules have been really tough to get players to come to Brisbane. The initial rules that the VFL at the time gave were remarkably poor, and even when a player, say Scotty McIver, who was a Queenslander who'd won Fitzroy's best and fairest, wanted to come back to Queensland, the club was asked to pay something like $175,000 in clearance fees. It was really a competition that was bereft of money, and they saw the 2 new teams coming in as the way to solve the financial problems of the VFL.
The league was broke. The league was broke. We didn't have money, the money that the new clubs needed for help. In fact, we charged them $4 million licence fee to bring them into the competition. So it's got to be seen in that context that we needed to get a decision out of the clubs, and we required to charge a licence fee in order to do that, which was distributed to the clubs.
Picked up by Bernie Harris, out to Jeffrey Rains, and it's fitting that Rains has the last kick. And the final score, a resounding, a memorable, a magnificent win to the Brisbane Bears, 19 goals, 23, 137, defeating North Melbourne 15-14, 104.
We'll keep improving as time goes by. I mean, we've had to listen to all the criticism. All I can say is that it's not bad for a mob of misfits, cast-offs and rejects, and the best is yet to come.
Feels all right. No voice, but it feels okay.
Christopher Skase, one of Australia's most prominent and successful businessmen, joined the club as deputy chairman. The young and dynamic Skase, whose business interests encompass both media and tourism, has staked his personal fortune in his belief in Queensland's future.
Well, how long have you got? Christopher Skase was a most interesting character. He had no interest in football at all. He had interest in Christopher Skase and developing and building his profile. I think he decided to get involved because when he went to America to talk to the billionaires that he wanted to do business with, he needed to be able to say, well, I've got a football team too. Just one story. The first day, big gathering at the ground, big dinner, and the normal protocol was for the chairman of the AFL to sit with the current president and a few sponsors. Well, I was right in the back corner of the room, sitting with people I had no idea who they were. We were eating lobster, and the lobster in Queensland had been flown up by Rollins from Melbourne. We had a raffle. This raffle was $5,000 a ticket. And people were put on the spot in this dining room to put forward $5,000. There were 20 tickets. The prize was a week in the penthouse at the Savoy in London, tickets to the British Open, sitting at Greg Norman's table at the official dinner, and Noel Gordon, the future chairman of the Brisbane Lions, he actually won it. And to cut a long story short, he never was paid for the tickets and everything that he went and bought to go to England.
When I arrived at the Bears, things weren't great. The facilities at Carrara were really primitive. The offices were portacom units, temporary units, and virtually all of the stadium was temporary stands at that stage. When Christopher left the club, from memory, I think it had about $28 million worth of debt. The team actually didn't play in the AFL pre-season competition that year. The team didn't have an owner for a period of time, and so the players actually didn't have contracts and were afraid to play given they might be injured and weren't certain what the future was. So they were pretty tough times. A lot of people don't realise some of the difficulties back at that stage. Ruben Pellerman then agreed to become the owner of the Bears.
Yeah, when I arrived at the Bears, the owner was Ruben Pellerman, so it was privately owned. I didn't see a lot of Ruben. He had a couple of fellas who pretty much ran his affairs. He was supportive when I saw him, but he didn't have much of an understanding of the game. But from what I'm told, had he not invested in the Bears, they may not have lasted long at all.
Ruben was an interesting character. Every time we went to see him at one of his private hospitals, he'd ask if we'd brought Tony Lockett with us. When we were negotiating in one of the convertible containers, shipping containers at Carrara one day, we were at a really important part of the negotiations when the door to the container flew open and Ruben's standing there in a pair of overalls and gumboots, muddy gumboots, and he said, "Have you done the deal? The toilets have arrived. I've got to get them installed." It just broke the room up, and quite a light-hearted moment, and the deal was done very soon afterwards. Well, the view was around the commission table that there were too many teams in Melbourne. We could not economically support all the teams in Melbourne.
There may have been a loyal band of supporters at the Western Oval this morning, but not even 100,000 fans could have saved Footscray. At midday, the VFL gave the club two options: extinction or merger.
Footscray were in trouble, Fitzroy were in trouble financially. Both boards were bought into the league headquarters, and they both decided at that time that they should merge. From there on, all hell broke loose.
I'm very pleased to announce today the formation of a new force in VFL football called the Fitzroy Bulldogs.
Supporters rose up. Some notable supporters rose up. One of them, Peter Gordon, and Peter did a marvellous job of rallying the troops. Footscray in particular had raised, I don't know, about $25,000 over nearly 2 years. And they were required to raise something like $1.8 million in a period of 2 or 3 weeks. The judge said, well, if you can raise that, I'll instruct the AFL. In fact, the AFL agreed to give their licence back. Well, they raise money from everywhere.
I feel sorry for them and I worry about them because it has been their life. And I know, I get letters from them. I visited an 85-year-old guy last night who lives every year for the Footscray Football Club. Now, I don't know, I'm worried about them.
And they sold a lot of car bumper stickers with Up Yours Oakley on them. And I always say that I helped to save the Footscray Football Club because those stickers were very, very popular.
Up yours, Oakley! Put Footscray back on the field!
People don't like change, and particularly football supporters. The clubs were all happy for mergers to occur as long as it wasn't them. The Footscray supporters rose up, and it was the one moment where they galvanised in order to save the club, and I don't think that would have happened without this action having been taken.
The Brisbane Bears at the time that they were sent up, it's well recorded that they weren't very well prepared. They weren't given a decent crack at recruiting, and their facilities were poor. They had to train and play out of Carrara where they had portable buildings, and Robert Walsh went up there and he had to rebuild the whole thing. I think that was the worst period. Actually, the worst period wasn't really the first 3 or 4 years, was it? It was probably the next 3 or 4 years.
I was sacked as coach of Carlton in 1989, midway through the season, and had the 1990 season off. And it was through that season that I got an approach from Andrew Ireland and Shane O'Sullivan, who were football manager and CEO of the Bears, and they came to Melbourne and asked me if I'd be interested in coaching the Brisbane Bears. And after quite some time thinking about it, my wife and I decided, yeah, let's have a crack at it. It was a 3-year contract, so we left Melbourne and headed to the Gold Coast. For the first 2 or 3 months, I'm talking November, December, I was still based in Melbourne because I was teaching, but I'd go up each weekend and the boys were doing their summer training, pre-season. I guess the thing that struck me was how temporary everything was. There were portable buildings around Carrara for the administration, for the change rooms, and whilst the ground itself was fantastic, I just thought, gee, it looks a temporary situation here. And the other thing that really hit me was just the low membership. We played in front of crowds of only 5, 6, 7,000. Coming from, say, a club like Carlton, where I'd coached, and Fitzroy before that, where I coached, we were playing in front of pretty full houses. Admittedly, that was back in the days of the suburban grounds like the Junction Oval and Princess Park.
Yeah, it'd be fair to say that in those early days, we needed to chase talent, and we were able to get some really good talent to the club. It was really probably as we started to push into the Walls era, and Scott Clayton, who had been head of recruiting and became head of football, really pushed that we needed to start to look at the youth side of developing the talent at the club.
I know that early days when I was coaching the Brisbane Bears, we would recruit players and they didn't want to come. They just felt that the place had no future. And I can remember having quite a few arguments with players and their managers. And sometimes we just dug deep and insisted that players that we drafted would come. And it caused a fair bit of heartache. But we had to be strong. If we were just going to let players who we drafted just drift away, well, we had no credibility at all. And so I look back on that time and I'm really proud that we dug deep and insisted that players come. And eventually we made it a place where people wanted to come. It was an unusual situation to be called the Brisbane Bears, but we were actually playing out of the Gold Coast. And I know that there were a lot of people in Brisbane who would not be part of the club because of that. They just felt cheated that here's the club called Brisbane and it's actually being played on the Gold Coast.
The people in Brisbane who had supported the licence application felt cheated that the team had been taken to the Gold Coast. So it was important for the team to be relocated back to the Gabba. Those couple of years were really tough. To Ruben's credit, he backed the club through that period. It wasn't easy for him. I suspect over that couple of year period, he probably lost over $10 million, which back in those days is a lot of money today, but it was an awful lot of money then.
I coached the Bears there in 91 and 92 at Carrara, and then the move was to Brisbane, and that's one of the best things that ever happened.
Tonight at 7:20 at the Gabba,
Night greyhound racing officially gets underway in Brisbane.
Well, the dog track at the Gabba, it was like an egg-shaped ground, and it also had a big slope on it. The dog track had been there for years and years, but when they redeveloped the Gabba, the dog track went, the ground was evened out, new stands were built.
It'd be fair to say that Queensland Cricket weren't absolutely enamoured with a football club coming to run over their hallowed cricket pitch, and I remember we had quite a few confrontations with Barry Richards, who was the head of Queensland Cricket at the time.
We've talked about the ground, Bernie. We don't have 50-metre lines here, incidentally. We have 40-metre lines, but the government has given the go-ahead for work to be done on this ground.
And it will be very important to the Bears' future, I'm sure, Sandy.
Fortunately, the government of the day understood the importance of having AFL football played at the Gabba, and we ended up negotiating not only a longer-term tenancy at the ground, but also for the government to support the removal of the dog track and to start to build some of the facilities that are here today.
One, we were playing at a stadium that was permanent. You know, the Gabba had established grandstands. We'd only been there a year or two, and they gave us new rooms. New rooms were built, had a new gymnasium. It was a proper AFL football facility. It also was easier for the club to get sponsorship because, you know, the club was based in Brisbane, and also the membership started to grow because a lot of Brisbane people jumped on board. And in fairness, a lot of the Gold Coast people who'd supported the Bears in the early first 4 or 5 years, they also made the trip up. At Carrara, I just felt the place could be dismantled in 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, look, the Nathan Buckley story could be probably an hour epic by itself.
I'd seen Nathan Buckley, I think it was about 1992, in a reserves game for Port Adelaide, Adelaide Oval, and I followed him up to a game the following week. Port Adelaide played a game the following week in Alice Springs, and I thought it was worth the trip after seeing him play.
And so Nathan, we were interested in. At the same time, North Melbourne became very interested in him, and it'd be fair to say that they had spoken to the club about the possibility of Nathan moving to North Melbourne after playing a season at the club. His form actually improved out of sight. He'd been a pretty good young player, and then the following year he actually boomed in the South Australian Footy League and won the Magarey medal, so became hot property. And what the club did, trying to convince him to come and play with the Bears when he was getting a lot of offers from other clubs, was we signed him on a deal which enabled him to come and play for us, but agreed that if a club came to the Bears at the end of the first year, he would be cleared to that club. They'd have to give up their first-round draft pick, and they could nominate 10 players that the Bears couldn't touch, and then the Bears could take 2 players outside that.
I knew that he would only be coming to us for 1 year. Nathan knew that. A lot of people in the footy world didn't. I can only speak highly of Nathan. He committed to that year. He gave absolutely everything he could. We played him in a variety of positions. The year before, he'd won the Magarey medal in South Australia for Port Adelaide as a centreman, but we played him half-back, half-forward, wing, centre-half-back, gave him tagging jobs. He accepted everything that we asked of him, and he ran runner-up in our best and fairest to Michael McLean. So he was a true professional. He turned 21 that year. I remember going to his 21st birthday party at the Morningside Football Club. And, yeah, look, I loved him. I just thought he was fantastic. I had no doubt that he would go on and become a superstar of the competition, which he did.
Will nearly kick a goal. Buckley kicks a goal.
One of the things that Robert Walls had stressed was he was happy to have Nathan as long as there was no preceding deal for indefinitely to go to a club. He understood that there was the contract was in place, but he wanted Nathan to come virtually uncommitted to any club going forward, hoping that we could convince him after a season at the club to stay with us. Ultimately, he didn't do that. He made the decision that he wanted to go to Collingwood.
The thing that I'm really pleased about, Brisbane dug in and ensured that he came to the club. The club could have rolled over and just let him go. He wanted to go to Collingwood, but there'd been talks with North Melbourne prior to that. And the club could have weakened, but they didn't. And I'm really glad that Nathan Buckley came and played that 1 year.
The Bears used their first-round pick to select Chris Scott, who obviously became a great player for the club, and also Craig Starcevich and Troy Lean.
Now Nathan Buckley on the right foot from a standing position, brings it up in front of goal. Merritt shot left and out. He's paid the mark, and he's paid the mark. That was sheer strength by Merritt on that occasion. Look at the cheer squad behind the goal. Roger Merritt kicks and goals.
Roger had been captain of the Bears before I got there. I knew Roger as that hard, tough centre-half forward for Essendon back in the 80s. Again, I got nothing but high praise for Roger. He trained hard, he played hard. His performances, particularly in Brisbane, where I think the warmer condition helped his older body, he was averaging 2-3 goals a game there. And for our younger players, and we fielded some of the youngest teams that have ever played AFL football back in the early 90s. They were teenagers. To have Roger as the captain and the leader and the on-field strong presence was worth its weight in gold.
We were able to get players from Queensland zone, which made sense, and Jason Nakamanis and Clark Keating and a number of players who came onto our list in that time. And also, for a period, we had first access on some players out of Northern Territory, and Darryl White was probably the leader of the group who came from there and obviously was a great player for the club.
You knew in the pecking order of sports journalism up there, we were a long way back because the Broncos were flying. The rugby union was strong. There was a professional soccer team, the Bullets, the basketball team were playing, so you'd have to go well into the paper to see a mention of the Bears. Once we started to win some games and become not a force, but we became respected in the AFL, we were getting more coverage, and that was really pleasing. And also, we were getting players and their managers getting in touch with us saying, our boy would like to come and play for you. And that was a far cry from the early days when they didn't want to come. So the players, to a large extent, were anonymous, but a lot of them were Brisbane-based boys who'd grown up there, and they were just hungry to play AFL. And, we put in a 17-year-old Michael Voss, a 17-year-old Jason Nakamanis, some of the young fellas that we recruited and drafted, like a 17-year-old Nigel Lappin and Chris Scott. They came up and they were just thrilled to be part of an AFL club.
For a couple of years, I'd been courted by a few clubs and had no interest whatsoever of leaving. I think I sort of entertained the conversations maybe to get a free lunch more than anything else. And then eventually, the Brisbane Bears came and spoke to me. And again, I think realistically, I was going to go through the process and then sort of decline at the end of it. But they offered me a massive contract, which was 10 years. It was guaranteed money. It was pretty much triple what I was on at the Fitzroy Footy Club as well. And I took it to my skipper in Paul Roos, and I think we all agreed at the time that I had no choice. And it was as much as it was an exciting phase of my footy career, it was really tough to actually get to that stage to make the call to leave Fitzroy. When I arrived in Brisbane and at the Brisbane Bears, I think it was a bit of a shock to start with. I mean, Brisbane had just made the move up the road from the Gold Coast. They'd moved to the Gabba 12 months prior. The biggest thing that I noticed was the attention that AFL footballers got in the community. And going from growing up in Tassie, going to Melbourne, where even if people don't barrack for your club, they actually know who you are and probably give you some feedback about how bad you played on the weekend. So that was fairly typical. But then came up here and it's like no one knew you at all. And that was great. I mean, you think, how good is it? No one knows you, no one speaks to you, everyone's just goes about their normal life and treats you as a normal person. And then I think after 6 months, you thought, actually, no one knows you at all. This is no good. So that was a big change that I noticed. And once things started to turn, as far as the Bears starting to play some good footy and some of the young players starting to emerge, the recognition in Brisbane started to really pick up, and it got to an outstanding level, really.
We're at the Gabba in Brisbane for what should be a marvellous game. We probably wouldn't have thought we'd be saying that a couple of months ago, but it's the Brisbane Bears on the rampage and looking to continue to build their spot in the top 5 or 6 in the competition.
That's a great kick. It's a goal. It's excitement at the Gabba.
gets the handball. Galvanizing back onto his right foot. Galvanizing kicks for goal. He's put it through. Very exciting player, young Galvanizing.
A couple of really proud moments in my footy career were towards the end of 1995. We had sell-out crowds at the Gabba for games against Collingwood and Essendon. And a sell-out crowd at the Gabba back then was around about 20,000 people, but it was just fantastic that people were desperately trying to get tickets to see the Brisbane Bears play these sides, whereas you go back 4 or 5 years before that, you couldn't give tickets away.
Believe it or not, Fitzroy for many years was attempting to get someone to loan them some money, and they had a number of people who did so. For some reason or other, the island of Nauru loaned the Fitzroy Football Club money.
I'm not sure. People ask me what the connection was. There was somebody in the Fitzroy field that had a contact in Nauru, and that's how it developed, and they lent them more than $1 million.
I think as a Fitzroy supporter, we're hanging on to any hope, and when the government in Nauru came along and said that they were going to give us a heap of money based on, I think it was seagull shit or something like that, was it? Or something that the island, one of their main industries was, he still thought, oh yeah, this is great. The King of Nauru or the Prince of Nauru is going to give us money. That'll get us out of trouble. Obviously, we were desperate. We were a desperate bunch by the end, and we were taking money from anyone, unfortunately, but it gave us hope.
They then had their own troubles and asked for the money back, and Fitzroy couldn't provide it, so they put Fitzroy in a receivership.
It was interesting that when the club went into administration, whilst there was a senior administrator, a young person was actually put into the fold to help run the club for the back half of the year, and that was the Brisbane Lions' current CEO, Greg Swan.
Michael Brennan was actually appointed the receiver, and I worked for Michael, so I effectively took over as acting CEO of the club. John Burt was the CEO, but as the receivers, we took over the running of the club for probably the last 6 months of its existence. Our coach resigned the first day, so we had to appoint a new coach, which was Alan McConnell. Leon Harris, who now recruits for the Lions, he was also involved at the time as an assistant coach. So those guys coached the team for the last, I think it was about 8 weeks.
Okay, so I take over, and the reality is that I really didn't want to take over the second time. And the reason I didn't want to take over the second time is because I believe if you're a coach standing in front of a group of players, you need to believe that you can make a difference. I couldn't see for the life of me how we made things better for them, and so I really wrestled with that whole notion. I had a conversation with Brad Boyd, the captain, who suggested that the playing group were very strongly of the belief that I should be the one who took over again, for the simple fact that in a situation where not too many people were looking out for the well-being of the playing group, they felt that I would.
When we got appointed, we went out to Coburg, which is where they were training at the time, told the players what had happened. I mean, obviously, it had never happened before that a club had been placed in receivership and how that would work, which effectively meant that the administrator or the receivers took over and ran the place. When we got appointed receivers, we went to the offices, and the offices at the time were upstairs in the pub at Fitzroy, so it wasn't really a professional organisation. On that basis, it would sort of almost look like it was inevitable, because, I mean, you've got, you know, you're an AFL club and you're running your place at the back of a pub. None of the membership records are on computer. They were all done in old cards, and came to that AFL club and thought, wow, this is really struggling, and hence, you know, it probably was right for the merger, but that was probably my overwhelming memory of it.
I think that the Fitzroy people felt that they didn't get a lot of support from the media and other clubs too. I think they felt they were fighting a losing battle, a lonely battle. Every other club since 1980, with the exception of Essendon and possibly Carlton, have had financial problems. The Swans were bailed out. St Kilda had a scheme of arrangement. I think McAllister went to the bank one afternoon at Collingwood in '86 and fortunately, the bank said, yeah, you can keep going. They're not the only club that have had financial problems, but they were the only club that really hasn't been bailed out. Richmond had Save Their Skins campaign, didn't they? Yeah, so from that point of view, they're unique.
In 1996, the Commission was very keen to try and find a way to assist Brisbane, and we had to try and do that with finances and with players.
At that time, the AFL were keen for clubs to merge. There was a feeling that there was a push for this to happen. See, they had Fremantle coming in 95 and Port Adelaide 97, and I think for national television rights and exposure, national platform, they wanted fewer teams in Melbourne and greater number of teams interstate.
And so they offered substantial amounts of money for clubs to merge, and obviously Footscray had a chat to Fitzroy as well, and then there was obviously Melbourne and Hawthorn that nearly merged, and probably some other discussions that people didn't know about. I think Carlton might have chatted to North Melbourne at one stage as well, because they owned a bit of North Melbourne at the time. So there was a whole lot of discussions happening, and the AFL were encouraging that.
North Melbourne have been looking at different alternatives to broaden their supporter base and we talked about travelling into games interstate. We talked a lot of ideas, and then I went to a meeting, a VFL and AFL called meeting at Leonda restaurant earlier that year, and all the clubs were there, presidents and CEOs, and they brought a package to every club saying their number one strategic priority was to merge two clubs out of Melbourne. We took the package back as a board. We discussed it a number of times. I can't recall who approached who, but we sat down with the Fitzroy board and we started working on an arrangement under the conditions that the AFL had set for two merged clubs.
It had been a long-term possibility for the club to go down the merger route. We knew that Fitzroy, back I think around 87 maybe, had actually had a meeting where the players had voted to be willing to move to Queensland. And so there'd been a bit of interest. Noel Gordon and the board and myself understood that interest. We had regular dialogue with the different CEOs and presidents, really pretty much from the time we came out of private ownership and as we moved back to Brisbane. And often Fitzroy would say, look, no, we want to try and make it on our own. But we continued those discussions, and I guess it really started to ramp up at the start of the 96 season.
See, merging our list and Fitzroy's list, you could never do it with the 40 players. You had to give opportunities to more players, financial advantages, salary cap advantage. You needed all those things. So we made it very clear, and Ross Oakley made it very clear with the package offered. We took up the offer. We then discussed it with Fitzroy. We then announced it to the players and announced it to the media. We announced it to the players first, and I recall vividly standing in front of the cameras when we announced it in the North Melbourne change rooms. The key players stood behind me when I announced it. They understood the situation the club was in and they supported our decision.
It had been alluded to in the media for a long time, on and off. Sometimes the story got hotter than other times, but the reality was, as a staff and a playing group, we were largely removed from all of that. In fact, I'd say somewhat ignored, to be honest. My understanding is that the board had been negotiating directly with North Melbourne since late in 1995, but in fact we didn't hear anything about that until somewhat into the season in 96.
We took a giant leap towards Fitzroy when we announced the name and the jumper. I think when you announce a name like North Fitzroy and you're preserving their history, North Fitzroy Kangaroos, it was a good combination there, and I felt that was a giant step forward. We worked out and we had an agreement, and that wasn't going to be easy for any two clubs with their own pride and their own looking after their interests of their own clubs and supporters. So I felt it was going to work, and the rest of our board and the Fitzroy board were in total agreement.
They were well down the track with a merger for North, but I think the problem was that Melbourne were going to be squeezed out, but North were going to have the coach and the colours and I think the only thing they weren't going to have was the emblem. So it was a little bit more, it was more like a takeover than a merge.
I'll never forget, we had 1,000, I can tell you the figure. I was not on 1,000, and I spent Sundays in the office and we responded to every single letter, in those days letters, no emails, individually, and we answered them honestly. And I honestly felt we had a 90-95% support of the merger with Fitzroy.
It's a funny one for me because, you know, I was hoping Fitzroy would merge with North Melbourne. When it looked like they were going to merge with North Melbourne throughout the 96 season. That was quite encouraging because I just wanted to play centre forward, and Wayne Carey is the dominant centre forward at the time, and I thought, geez, how cool would that be? I get to go father-son to North Melbourne Lions or whatever we end up getting called, and I'll get to play with Wayne Carey. That'd be pretty amazing. And then obviously that fell off the table. Brisbane came into the picture, so it probably took a little bit longer for me to embrace that. But it's funny, for 12 months I was probably like a cork in the ocean, just bobbing away. Still following Brisbane, not fully embracing them. I love the fact that we had the old lion on the jumper, but obviously I was keeping one eye on North Melbourne. So if I had to be honest, I'd say I had one foot in North Melbourne camp, one foot in the Brisbane camp.
As a receiver, you're obligated to get the best result you can for the creditors, and we're appointed by the government of Nauru. We originally thought we had a deal with the North Melbourne. We'd had actually a bit of a drink in the boardroom at Ernst & Young on I think it was a Wednesday night, sort of toasting that was, in the process of happening, and North were going to take all the players. Then we got a call from the AFL saying, that's probably not going to happen. Brisbane, this is the next morning, first thing in the next morning, Brisbane are coming around. They're going to come and see you, and they came along with a lawyer and offered us $1 million more than North Melbourne did, and agreed to only take 10 players.
The AFL, in their wisdom, had a real good look at this, and they thought, we've told the clubs their number one strategic priority is a merger of the two clubs in Melbourne, but in all reality, it wasn't true. The truth was that they wanted success for the northern states, and I understand that now. I mean, it was probably the right number one strategic priority, but they changed their mind.
North Melbourne made a very bad blue. Brisbane asked for a certain number of players from the Fitzroy list. North Melbourne wanted them all, and the clubs were never going to agree to that. With North at the time, with Carey and with a very good team, they actually ended up winning the premiership that year, and they wanted all the Fitzroy players as well. So the clubs were never going to agree to that.
They jilted us, they seduced us and jilted us. Basically, that's what happened. They then arranged for a few club spokesmen to get together and to start promulgating the fact that this was going to produce a super club.
I actually was a bit scurrilous about this. I pretended I thought it was a good idea, and I wrote stories saying that this is going to make the North Melbourne a powerful team, a super team and all that sort of stuff. And Richmond got onto this, and Richmond were the first club to Leon Daphne. I remember saying to him at a lunch, I said, gee, North are going to be powerful with Fitzroy. And so he was, I think, pretty sure was the first one who said, hang on, well, this is not going to happen.
Strengthening of the team that's already on top of the ladder by additional players available to them on their list, and a special allowance on the salary cap could create a super team that would be equal to at least 5 years of the draft process.
If it's unacceptable to 13 clubs, then I wonder why they didn't say so 12 months ago.
Well, no clubs were supportive because they feared this super club, as Leon Daphne used those words a few times. Now, they weren't supportive of it because they were concerned they wouldn't be able to compete against a team that had the stars that North Melbourne had at the time and the sprinkling of players that Fitzroy had, together with a list of 50 players. They were going to be unbeatable for a number of years. That was their concern.
When I left the Bears, I came back to Melbourne and became coach at Richmond. And there was talk about teams merging and becoming super teams and so on. And I thought, well, there's a fair chance that could happen because you're picking the eyes out of one club and putting it with young talent that's had 5 or 6 years to develop and was ready to be at their best for the next 5 or 6 years. So, yeah, I thought there was every chance that a super team was in the making.
And the future of Fitzroy is being decided right now with a crucial meeting of all AFL clubs. The meeting began late this afternoon and is still going on right now. Peter Donegan is at the MCG. So, Peter, The Brisbane Bears have added yet another twist to this ongoing saga.
Yes, Mel, it certainly seems as though this afternoon that the Bears have emerged as a serious contender to merge with Fitzroy. It did look as though the Kangaroos had it stitched up, but the Brisbane offer apparently has blown everyone out of the water. The delegates started arriving round about 2:30 this afternoon, and they've been filing into the social club at Richmond. Not too many of them had much to say as they went in, but one man who did speak was North Melbourne Chief Executive Greg Miller, and he was still hopeful the Lions and the Roos would be able to get together.
The offer's on the table from the AFL, which has quite clearly emerged between North and Fitzroy. So that's, first of all, any talk of Brisbane, the clubs have got to overturn that first.
Do you like the idea of North Fitzroy?
No, we're not going to have a barrable list of 54 players. And I don't think there's any support within the competition other than 2 clubs for that.
What about if Brisbane stand up and say they'll have a merger with 42?
We'd be very interested in that.
So we met at Richmond. I remember the meeting. Mark Dawson and I went, and we listened to what they had to say, and we said, no, we're not changing. So we knew then that, pretty much knew then, that the Commission would favour the Brisbane opportunity that had been presented to them, and that's exactly what happened.
The AFL were pretty powerful in those days. There were a lot of clubs that were beholden to the AFL. So there were not too many clubs were going to say, you can't do this to Fitzroy. It wasn't a great feat to convince all the clubs to block the North Melbourne merger.
The clubs ended up unanimously supporting the Brisbane side of the merger and didn't want it to go to North Melbourne. There was a famous meeting prior to the actual official meeting where the decision was made by the Commission.
The delegates then made their way to AFL House for tonight's meeting with the Commission, when the fate of Fitzroy will probably be decided. Both merger proposals need the support of at least 6 clubs to succeed.
The Commission met this evening and approved a merger relationship with the Brisbane Football Club and the Fitzroy Football Club.
The Commission had no hesitation in bringing Brisbane and Fitzroy together because it just worked as a combination. Fitzroy were the Lions. Brisbane didn't want to be the Bears. The Lions is a strong symbol. It had a terrific song, it had a great jumper, and Brisbane were prepared to adopt all those things because there wasn't a great deal of support in Brisbane for the Bears and the Bears jumper. To get a song, get support base in Melbourne, to get $6 million from the Commission and some players, some very good players, all looked like the best possible deal that the AFL could extract from this situation.
From a Commission point of view, this is the absolute best outcome for the competition and certainly fits in with our strategic plan. In our view, given the 2 deals that were before us tonight, the Brisbane Bears deal was a good deal, better for the competition than the North Melbourne one.
You know, when a company goes into administration, the administrator really comes in and has got a couple of things that they need to do, and a key to that is making sure that the people owed money by that company are looked after. We were very clear about what we could offer Fitzroy in regard to its debt. The meetings that we'd had with them, they'd indicated what they thought their debt was. In the end, they were a fair way off what it was. And that was a bit compounded by the fact that the administration took over partway through a season, so you still had to get out the other end of the year, and obviously there were bills to pay through that year. But fundamental to it, when the final decision was made, the offer to the people owed money at Fitzroy was much better.
All of the players and the employees will be paid in full. There's an accommodation reached with the Nauru Insurance Corporation, and most importantly, there'll be a significant dividend payable to other unsecured creditors.
As I said, we were legally obligated to take that offer, and we did. And anyway, Brisbane were pretty chuffed that they got the Lions, and probably that's a little bit ironic for me that I ended up working here, you know, all those years later. So interesting.
The Kangaroos were prepared to compromise, but not to the stage where it became detrimental to their club.
When it got back into AFL headquarters in there, the auction continued, and we weren't prepared to be part of it. We weren't going to change. We were offered a package. They wanted us to reduce that package. They actually didn't really want us to reduce the package. They wanted the deal to go through with Brisbane. The offer then changed, the deal changed. You wouldn't go back on what you'd already agreed upon. The AFL, as I said before, they seduced us, they got us involved, they jilted us, they changed their mind, and probably for the right reasons.
But what's got to be remembered is that a great bunch of supporters here in Melbourne are going to be considerably disenfranchised with the number of games they'll have on their doorstep.
It was a very hollow feeling. All of a sudden, I felt like I didn't have a team to support, and obviously had no affinity with Brisbane at the time, and so it's a hollow feeling. All of a sudden, as a kid, you've grown up very passionate as a Lions supporter, and you've got no one to barrack for.
6-year-old David Robinson has lost the love of his life. He's a Fitzroy fanatic, his bedroom a shrine to the club.
I just kept on crying and crying.
I was quite upset about my footy club just disappearing. Mum's actually got quite a lot of memorabilia from me at home of letters that I wrote to the AFL about the merge and the Lions. I'm actually the only one in my family that barracked for Brisbane and Fitzroy. And as for friends, I think from memory when I was young, I was sort of the only Lone Ranger in that department. Dad and Mum used to dress me up in all the Fitzroy gear, Fitzroy teddy bear, Fitzroy all signed footballers, and I was pretty fanatic back when I was 6.
I think the majority of Fitzroy people would have been happier with a merger with North Melbourne. I think that's what had been sold. That was what probably their hope was, because they could stay in Melbourne and go and watch the team.
I really didn't want us to go to North Melbourne, even though North Melbourne are a great club, one of the great clubs of the AFL. But I wanted us to have a future up in Brisbane because I could see the progress that could be made up there.
It was a bittersweet situation, really. I mean, in some ways it was great that now I was back with my own club, but at the same time, and why it was so hard when I left, was the fact that Fitzroy was no longer in its own right. It wasn't a standalone club, which was, I think, was terribly sad for so many that were so passionate. But then, yeah, the sweet side, as I said, was, you know, I was back with so many of those supporters and a number of teammates that I'd played a lot of footy with. So, yeah, it was a funny, strange old night, that one, when the announcement came through.
It's heritage. And what's wrong with heritage, you know? Fitzroy.
The whole point of following a football team is to go to the football and watch them play live, as the Brisbane Lions will have 6, maybe a few more games in Melbourne each year.
You know, I'm from Melbourne. Why would I barrack for a club called Brisbane?
I played with the Fitzroy Football Club, not the Brisbane Lions, and it may have the same jumper, but it's not going to be the Fitzroy Football Club that I know. It's a new era. You either support that or you live with your memories.
I'm going to get drunk and I'm not going to work tomorrow. That's how I feel up there. So from 40 years.
The overriding thought I have of the whole situation is the fact that it's a business. If you can't pay your bills, you can't operate.
There was a portion of that I felt of the Brisbane Bears supporters that were disappointed with it, because they were on the rise with the likes of Voss and some of the young superstars that were coming through and playing in finals for the first time over the last couple of years, or previous couple of years. I think a lot of them sort of were asking the question, why?
I had mixed feelings. One of the feelings that I had was the Bears are well on track to become a successful team on their own after doing it so hard that they were just getting very close to becoming a really successful side. And I thought, do we want to dilute that by merging with another club? Now, that other club was my old club, Fitzroy, where I played for 3 years and coached for 5 years, and met some fantastic people in that 8-year period and really enjoyed my time at Fitzroy. But I also knew that Fitzroy couldn't survive on their own in Melbourne. And that writing was on the wall way back in the 80s when I was coaching Fitzroy. I knew that they didn't have a great future.
The Bears supporters weren't quite happy about taking on Fitzroy either, because they made representation about that, you know, about Fitzroy coming out. Why do we need Fitzroy, you know? But look, it's still the Lions, which has turned out to be magic, you know?
With the merger deal now done, it's time for the AFL and Brisbane to celebrate and for North Melbourne to lick its wounds.
After the documents had been signed, the club representatives there, the commission went over the road, had a few celebratory drinks. During the period of time that we were there, the Footy Show were in touch.
The big news, of course, today is that the first merger in AFL history has finally come to fruition. It was an 11th hour bid by the Brisbane Bears to get control of the Fitzroy Football Club. The man who has done the deal of 100 years, please welcome the chairman of the Brisbane Bears, Mr. Noel Gordon.
Biggest issue for the VFL at the time was the fact that one club was going to be running two teams. So there needed to be an absolute assurance that what Fitzroy was doing in their last season wasn't in any way compromised to help Brisbane's results. And clearly one of those problems was that Brisbane were going to play Fitzroy again at the back end of the season.
Yeah, and on the Footy Show, Noel Gordon, the president of Brisbane, was, well, to be perfectly blunt, tactless when he described the new merger.
Round 20 at Optus Oval, you play Fitzroy. That's an interesting one. Auditions.
Well, it's a chance to build a percentage, isn't it?
I genuinely believe in Noel's case, by the time he'd had a few champagnes and got onto the Footy Show, he thought it was probably a bit cute to sort of say, given we're running two teams, you'd be surprised if we didn't, you know, have a good win. Clearly didn't go down well with a lot of the Fitzroy people. I'm absolutely convinced that Noel, you know, in the spirit the Footy Show used to be in terms of comedy and things of the like, thought he was being funny. It wasn't meant to be a slight, I don't think, for Fitzroy. It was more around the fact that you have this very unique situation where one club was actually running both teams.
We started, as I said, 4 years ago with $375,000 in the bank, and we'll make a profit of $100,000 in 4 years. It's taken Fitzroy 113 years to lose $4 million. So, I mean, draw your own conclusion, I don't know.
All right, Noel, well, them's fighting words, and I don't know how many of the Fitzroy boys will be too happy to hear that. But at the end of the day, that is the deal that has been done.
He was pretty unsympathetic to Fitzroy, wasn't he? Flippant and this was pretty unkind of Fitzroy supporters who were suffering enough at the time.
So we get to the Brisbane game, and the press during that week is around, you know, the fact that this is a great opportunity for the playing group to put on a dress rehearsal for a great job rehearsal, if you like. And so it was seen externally as a huge uniting opportunity for the playing group to put on a good show. And the reality is, it was, in my mind, it was 180 degrees the opposite to that.
Good hands to Keating, and Keating goes for goal and bouncing through for his third. That's a good start.
But a playing group who, probably there's 6 or 7 of them at this stage, were already pretty clear they were going to get a contract with the new entity. We had 3 or 4 players who thought they might get an opportunity with the new entity. We had a group of older players who probably realised it was all over, and then we had a young group who basically had no idea what was going on. And so rather than being a unifying force, it actually became one that drove a level of survival and selfishness, which isn't conducive to good footy. So not surprisingly, it was the first of the games where we really got belted.
Well, yeah, Fitzroy got the jumper out of it. I think that was important. In 1996, Fitzroy played 19 games in Victoria, whereas the next year they only played 7. And that didn't even include Geelong. And I think they played, the merged team this year, 2019, will play 7 games in Victoria, one of which is at Ballarat. It's access to that. But the Brisbane Lions did make other concessions, didn't they? I mean, and they were reasonable concessions, such as retaining the Fitzroy Guernsey in some shape or form.
There's no doubt that Brisbane did well out of it, but what we did do was use the Fitzroy song, use the Fitzroy jumper, get involved all the old Fitzroy champions of the past, and Kevin Murray and these guys, they all became very important parts of the whole Brisbane experience. We also had a batch of supporters when Brisbane came down to Melbourne, and they used just the Lions name when they came to Melbourne. They dropped Brisbane and just called themselves the Lions. So they tried very, very hard to make it as equal a merger as they could. They did more than anyone else could have, certainly more than North Melbourne was ever going to contemplate doing, in order to really take the Fitzroy supporters in behind them and all the history of the club.
I snigger a little bit at the term merger, as I articulated, because for me and for those working in the business, I saw it probably more along the lines of a takeover than a merger. It would suggest a degree of collaboration. At no point did I ever, or to the best of my knowledge, any of the staff have a meeting with the Brisbane staff about anything, about us, about the playing group, about what might be the case going forward. So in that context, you know, I know there were a couple of staff who finished up working for Brisbane the following year, and obviously the playing group that moved up there. But other than that, it was basically every man for himself. On a weekly basis, it got more and more acutely oppressing. Going to the game each week was a bit like going to a state funeral. And each state funeral was more widely promoted and scrutinised, and it became more and more of a public exhibition, if you like. So we get to the Melbourne game and there's 80-odd thousand people. We're playing Richmond, and to be honest, the performance was embarrassing.
Pretty dark at the moment for the final time for Fitzroy in Melbourne.
Poor old Lions were down and out, and they got hammered that day by the Tigers. It was a sad day. It was a really sad day, and I can remember seeing so many of the old Fitzroy supporters. The diehards who'd been following the club for 40, 50, 60 years, they were there to see Fitzroy play its last game. Fitzroy's got a wonderful history of players who gave so much to the game, but you know, you think of Kevin Murray and Butch Gale and Gary Wilson, you know, towards the end of it, Bernie Quinlan, who was one of the best players you could ever wish to see, Hayden Bunton going back over many years, you know, triple Brownlow medalist. Yeah, it was a pretty sad occasion for me and for thousands of others to see the last Fitzroy team play in Victoria.
And it really is Fitzroy's worst nightmare as far as finishing in Melbourne. It's the absolute last thing they wanted. And he kicks towards centre wing, and Richardson. There's the siren. The end has come in Melbourne for Fitzroy. Well, we'll listen to the Richmond theme song, but it is the Fitzroy flags that are flying as they say farewell.
Yeah, so long, Fitzroy. Thanks for the memories. And I guess that's all we've got now, the Fitzroy Football Club.
And the worst bit of that day is that at the end of the day, somebody, and I can't tell you who, but it was resolved that the players needed to do a lap of honour. And we'd just been beaten by 180 points in front of 80,000 people, none of whom left. They were all still there at the end. There's actually a photograph of myself and Brad Boyd standing in the centre circle at the MCG. I've got my arm around him, and the caption is around the intimate relationship that exists between the captain and his coach. And the reality was, I was whispering in his ear, mate, you got to go, and he's basically telling me where to go. Because the last thing that the playing group wanted to do at that point was to do a lap of honour. And my explanation to him was that it wasn't us who needed to do the lap of honour, but the jumpers needed to. So unfortunately, we were the poor fools who were inside those jumpers.
These are great scenes here with Fitzroy getting a standing ovation from Richmond supporters who have joined in the Fitzroy theme song. And you can't help but be moved by what is taking place at the moment.
It was incredibly embarrassing. Well, that's certainly how I can't quantify for others how they felt, but for me it was incredibly embarrassing that something that was 100 years old and had such a proud history despite all its struggles had come to this, and here we were somehow representing that entity on that day in its sort of final appearance in Melbourne. And so, yeah, it was a tough day.
I think it's just fitting tribute for a club. I mean, it's sorry, isn't it? You just think of 100 years, it's just walked past our door. I must admit, it is a sad day in footy, and hopefully we can all tell our grandkids and pass on the memories of the great warriors from Fitzroy.
And then they also had to suffer the fact that their last game was not in Victoria. It was in Western Australia against Fremantle. So that would have denied many Fitzroy supporters the chance to see the game, see their team play their last game in their 100th season, unbroken season. Their last game of 100 years in the competition was not in Victoria.
Go the Lions! And there's the siren. The end of an era, the end of an age for Fitzroy after 113 years. Where to for some of these youngsters? Brisbane will snap some of them up, others will go in the draft, and some might be seen in the AFL again.
Normie Brown and I went over to Perth to see them play over there. We were on the ground at half-time and before the game, and it was sad. It was sad, very sad. I mean, Kevin Ells was standing beside me on the ground and he was crying, and he was our trainer, been there for 50 years, you know. But I was quite upset because, you know, to see your club go in that way, but not knowing that what was going to happen in the future when it became the Brisbane Lions. And that was the heartening part about it.
September 1, 1996. It's a day the Fitzroy faithful will remember long after the club is forgotten.
There's a lot of sad stories in football, and I mean, I've just felt that they should have been supported, but a lot of people disagree with me. But that was just my view. I felt, though, as a foundation member of the AFL, the goodwill, from all those aspects, I felt that the AFL could have propped them up at least for another couple of years, but it wasn't to be.
I loved Fitzroy, and one of the things I loved about Fitzroy is that it was a club. It was a genuine club. The people that were attached to the club were rusted on through thick and thin. By this stage, given what the club had been through, if you still followed Fitzroy actively, then you were a pretty rusted on individual. And, you know, I loved, you know, the supporter groups. I loved the interaction with those people because come hail, rain or shine, they were supportive of what we were trying to do and supportive of the playing group.
It probably is a Bears thing too, but I definitely know it's a Fitzroy Lions thing because, you know, win, lose or draw, our supporters never deserted us at Fitzroy. They stuck with you through thick and thin. They'd be there the next week even though you might have got beaten by 15 goals. They were there on the boundary supporting you all the time.
I'm eternally grateful, despite all of the crap that went on, for the opportunity that I had to both work at Fitzroy and to be its coach. It afforded me an amazing experience, an amazing opportunity, some of which were pretty horrendous, that are also very unique.
Originally, I was offered to go to the Lions, but I had to wait for 12 months. And, you know, kid, not that keen on school. I just finished year 11. I wasn't that keen to wait 12 months. Hawthorn were knocking on the door, keen for me to go, but Dad had the great logic of Brisbane's a team on the way up. They just won the wooden spoon, so I thought the old man must be losing his mind. But his logic was Lee Matthews had just taken over. They've got a terrific young list, and there might be a spot at centre forward. I didn't realise he had a fairly handy crystal ball, the old man. Being a Fitzroy supporter growing up, I probably saw it as almost two lists. I saw the Fitzroy boys, which I probably would have wanted to get their autograph, and then I saw the rest. And, you know, so Chris Johnson, Jared Malloy, Brad Boyd, he won me pre-seasons. But, yeah, I saw it as a united club. I thought it was a united club, and I felt as if the dark days of the pre- and post-merger were past, mainly because of Lee's power, I suppose.
Grand final week when we flew down in 2001 and arrived at the airport, and I think Ansett had just gone bust, so we had a couple of chartered jets. But landing there, and maybe it's my memory, but it seemed like it was a packed house. Like, it seemed like there was 1,000 people there. Walking through that crowd and seeing the old Fitzroy scarves and the old Fitzroy jumper and their passion to see, once again, their jumper run out in the MCG on grand final day was great. And I think it was great for me as an ex-Fitzroy player, but I think it was fantastic for, even I suppose especially someone like Luke Power, whose family were Fitzroy supporters, and he was now seeing this passion as a player himself. To run into Fitzroy people week in, week out over my footy journey was pretty special, and especially that week when the Brisbane Lions finally broke through for a flag.
When it really solidified for me that we had Fitzroy supporters, dyed-in-the-wool Fitzroy supporters on board, was the day of the parade. You never know what to expect when you're coming from interstate and you're playing against a Melbourne club, and we're playing against Essendon. The parade, you think, oh no, there's going to be 90% black and red. When we got out there and it was 50% at least Lions colours, I thought that is amazing. I thought this merger is successful. It was a unified club and gave you great confidence going out the next day at 2 o'clock. Playing the grand final in front of 90-odd thousand people.
He's had 7 marks, 10 possessions, kicked 2 goals forward. They've done it. He's got the ball in his hands, Bruce. A bit of history here. Lee Matthews has been to the top of the mountain for a second time as coach. Once at Collingwood, and now he's done the impossible. Brisbane have won the premiership.
Well, you know, I didn't, unbeknownst to me, but over the other side of the ground, the camera was on me all across the ground, standing, just watching the presentation, and I was crying. I just couldn't help it. Mainly because my dad played in the 44 premiership, and my brother Ron played in the thirds and seconds, and my brother Dan played in the thirds and seconds. So we had a long association with Fitzroy. But also to be part of the Brisbane Lions meant so much to me. It was a wonderful feeling.
Having seen the passionate Fitzroy supporters and what they'd gone through, and that was players leaving, including myself, the club had ceased to exist in its own right and obviously merged with the Brisbane Bears. But the passion of those supporters we saw come out again.
It was an amazing weekend. It was, well, you can call it a unifying weekend, or you can call it solidifying the relationship. The experience of the grand final parade, the post-match celebration lap when we looked up in the grandstand and saw the great Bulldog Murray with his scarf on. Obviously, he's the patron saint of all things Lions. To see the way he embraced it, I felt like that had healed a lot of wounds.
But the next day, early, we caught a bus out to the Brunswick Street Oval, and there was thousands of supporters there at the Oval, and we were rolled out onto the stage and were introduced to the crowd, and that was extremely special because it was probably the time that the merger really sort of set in, and the supporters were together, they were on the same page, they were passionate for their club, their jumper that had just succeeded. So yeah, that was a special day at the Brunswick Street Oval in 2001 when finally, I think everyone thought, yeah, that is my club.
People are deep down honest about that weekend. I think they were proud to be a Brisbane Lions supporter.
I'm really proud of what the Brisbane Lions did under Lee Matthews, winning those premierships. I've got to say, I think they're the best team that I've ever seen. And the fact that they came from Fitzroy and the Bears, which I had the privilege to be part of. I enjoyed my coaching days at Fitzroy. That's where I first started as a coach. I was only 30 and I was given the opportunity and had the chance to coach, you know, champions that became household names like Roos, Pert, Osborne, Rendell. The Brisbane Bears days, you could write a book about it because it was tough work. We had very little. We had little support, little interest, but it grew.
I was a Fitzroy player and I was extremely proud of being a Fitzroy player. It was something that I never thought would change. I never wanted to leave Fitzroy. Circumstances worked out that I left Fitzroy and moved to Brisbane. And in Brisbane, I met another great group of young, highly motivated athletes that were determined to be successful. And I suppose, you weigh all that up, I'm a Brisbane Lions player, and I think the Brisbane Lions are an enormous amount of history of the Fitzroy Football Club for over 100 plus years, and certainly don't discount the part of the club that I was also a part of, the Brisbane Bears, who had enormous amount of support on the Gold Coast and passionate supporters that hung in there when they were playing out at Carrara and were losing a lot of football games, that hung in there through those difficult times. And again, that group actually got to experience the Brisbane Lions' success as well. So, no, it's a great situation to be in. Know a number of passionate groups and be a part of a great era.
Our move to Brisbane to join the Bears, I believe, was one of the best moves we've made to survive. And we did because the ones that supported the Brisbane Lions really accomplished something, because they watched all those mighty players win those 3 flags for us, which was just phenomenal, you know?
I think Kevin Murray's impact on this merger and his attitude towards it has made it a success. Without Bulldog, I'm not sure whether it would have been embraced by the Fitzroy public. Not to say we wouldn't have gone on and win premierships and been well supported, but I doubt very much whether it would have been a healing experience without the influence of Bulldog Murray.
I'm thrilled to be able to be still part of it. I'm coming on 81 this year, and I've had a couple of strokes, a couple of heart attacks, but you'll never get me to give in either. We're part of the Brisbane Lions, Fitzroy in Brisbane, and we'll still be a part of it till the day we die.